Welcome to the RSP Campus to Canton podcast. We are back after a little bit of a summer hiatus, getting a chance to kind of, rest and relax and that kind of thing. So, we're back for 2023. So joining me once again from Campus to Canton is the one and only Felix Sharpe, and it's always a pleasure to be able to do this. I'm glad we had a fun year last year, and we're ready to do it again.
Matt, thank you for having me. I think that you know this, but you hold a lot of influence in our community, and you have the ability to validate things and people. And by having me here, I think you're doing that for me. I think you're doing that for the Campus to Canton format. And so from all of us at Campus to Canton, sincerely, I thank you for giving me and us your platform to help grow this format.
Man, it's my pleasure. And I say that just because, when you think about what you guys do, you've got, I've often done, what we've done in ad read pretty much every week when we did this, that, when you describe it as dynasty fantasy football paired with college fantasy, that makes, when you think about the fact that you can have simultaneously working through or looking at and analyzing college and NFL every week, that's an awesome combination, and it's something that just fits right in with what I do at the RSP. So why wouldn't I want to see this grow? Why wouldn't all our listeners who love learning about rookies and learning about scouting and love the game of football, why wouldn't they want to give that a shot, especially if they're really diehard, fantasy football dynasty folks? Because people go down that rabbit hole, and I think about the rabbit holes I went down before I even started writing, when I was, just a fan in this space. And if Campus to Canton were a thing, I know the people in my office space where we were working, they would have been all over this. They would have loved this. Especially in Athens, Georgia. Are you kidding me? That's bigger than NFL, and they were big NFL fans.
Well, I think the thing that draws us to fantasy football, especially in the dynasty context, is discovery. Like finding new players. That's why everybody's looking at, how's Zach Evans looking? How's Israel Abanikanda looking? Gabe Davis wants a value for the Buffalo Bills. We love that. But in college football, we turn it up a notch because, one, we have a whole class that leaves every single year, and we have to project these players who haven't played. In our format, we have to say these players who haven't played are coming out of high school, that we're projecting them to the NFL. And so the challenge of discovery and figuring out who is next, it's a great thrill. And as Matt said, yes, Campus to Canton as a format, if you haven't heard, you have your regular NFL team, and you have a corresponding college team. When your college players declare for the NFL draft, they're added to your NFL team. But there are two championships: a college championship, you're playing college fantasy weekly, and your NFL team weekly. So the ultimate goal is to be the king of C's, as we say, to win both sides. But it's just so much fun to follow the college game this way through a C2C format.
Yeah, we'll check it out at campustocanton.com. Definitely head on over there and go from here. I'll say that we were looking at the possibility of me doing a league last year, and I was like, definitely going to do it. And then we had some things come up. One of them is, I'm going to blame my wife a little bit, just because she was in law school, so there were a lot of things going on here that I needed to be a little bit more available for. But I think this year is going to be a lot easier. So.
I dropped the ball, and startup season is really, January, February, somewhere around there, and we'll be talking about this class, the 2024 class, when that comes around. And so that's your prime RSP season. Maybe we'll wait until the RSP is released, but we're going to get you in this.
We'll figure it out. So this week, for those of you who are listening, and again, is that we're going to look at 10 things that Felix is looking at, heading in to football season. Because as you said, college football, 11 days away? Is that it? Is that what you said?
11 week 0, 11 days away.
Wow.
You do not have to wait just a little bit over a week. Will we be having college football in week 0 of the season?
Well, let's get it rolling. What is the first thing that's on your mind when you look at the landscape?
Yes, and I'm going to have some team things. I'm going to have some player things that we're looking at, some different stuff. But, I really think of my time here as being, even if you weren't paying attention to college, or excuse me, if you're not playing in campus to Canton leagues, you don't have an interest in college fantasy, I can still give you some things, players, teams, storylines to track as college football season comes. And hopefully, you will consider playing in a C2C league one day after kind of tracking some of these storylines. So the first, this is in descending order. Number 10, one of the storylines that I'm tracking is the coaching hot seat at both Florida and Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M, if you don't know, Jimbo Fisher is the head coach there at Texas A&M. They went 5-7 last year. This is one of the schools that has really leaned into the NIL marketing stuff. They've paid a lot of money to their 2022 recruiting class, the number 1 recruiting class, I think, of all time. But Jimbo Fisher has a $77 million buyout of his contract. They went 5-7 last year and had some really bad losses. They were not bowl eligible. You got to win 6 games to be bowl eligible. I don't know what's worse, the fact that if it's worse going 5-7 and not being bowl eligible, or going 6-6 and going to some bowl game and getting beat by a G5 team. So,
and correct me if I'm wrong, just as an interjection, but last year I remember, wasn't it Nick Saban who got all prickly about the recruiting class that Texas A&M had and grumbled about maybe the propriety of all this and NIL and what's going on? Is Nick Saban kind of like laughing right now a little bit?
Yeah. So I don't know that he said something about Texas A&M specifically, but yes, there was a dust-up between Nick Saban and his former assistant Jimbo Fisher, and he may have said it directly about Texas A&M, saying what Alabama does versus what Texas A&M does. But the funny thing is that every school is doing it now. Alabama's philosophy may be to use it for transfers or for upperclassmen, whereas other schools are using it to bring in recruiting classes, freshmen. But yes, you're absolutely right. So they got to get things corrected. Their offense was horrible last year, so they bring in, and this is the one of the things I'm tracking, is they bring in Bobby Petrino as offensive coordinator. Bobby Petrino, if you remember him wearing the neck brace during that press conference at Arkansas, he was Lamar Jackson's head coach at Louisville while he was there. If you want to go even back further than that, to that early 2004, 2005 era, Brian Brom, Harry Douglas, Michael Bush, who many thought was destined for NFL stardom. He was their head coach. So you've got Jimbo Fisher bringing an older guy to see if he can get this thing turned around. But we kind of think that if they go 5-7, 6-6 again after spending all this money, Texas A&M might actually come up with the money to pay a $77 million buyout to tell Jimbo Fisher to go somewhere else. So that is one I'm tracking. And then,
yeah, it's a disaster. Sorry to interrupt, but this could be a disaster because you think of watching, like, I watched Netflix's show on Johnny Manziel and how much of an influence his performance early on had on Texas A&M, riding his coattails to getting the new stadium, to like the alumni paying large sums of money to try and make A&M relevant to the level that they did. I mean, since then, you think of Cliff Kingsbury, you think of Kyler Murray after Manziel, and Baker Mayfield for a short bit, then Kyler Murray, and you look at all of that, and this team really hasn't done what all that money was hoping it would do. And that's kind of, so I have to think that that's kind of the backdrop with some of what's happening right now too. That's going to, you'd have to look at it. Do you think it will have people question whether you should pay players that much money because of how young they are, and if you're giving them that much money that early, um, how are they going to perform? And I'm not saying I'm against paying them by any stretch of the imagination. I just wonder, like, what kind of deals they had if they were different than, if there was any difference that was significant enough from other teams where, because they're all getting, because it maybe more of these guys are getting paid and it's such a recruiting class that maybe they're all kind of getting high off their own clips to a point that they're not ready.
I think it definitely takes a mature kid to get even mid five figures, money that you've never had as a kid, to be mature and to still go perform. And the conversation that you're talking about, I think, is one that's already being had. Where should if to the extent a program has NIL funds to spend, how should it be spent? With transfers, with players who have earned it, just like a scholarship, players that they developed internally, or with freshmen? And so that is a conversation that's being had.
Okay. Wow.
And just to finish off that point, with Florida, 6-7 last year, Billy Napier's first as head coach, I was deeply disappointed with how Anthony Richardson was used last year at Florida. I thought that Dan Mullen was a better play caller, a more creative play caller, I would say. So Florida, another SEC program with big-time expectations. Graham Mertz, a transfer from Wisconsin, is taking over for Anthony Richardson. They're probably going to lean on the running back room, which Billy Napier teams always have. Elijah Mitchell, who's now with the San Francisco 49ers, Raymond Calais, who's an undrafted free agent at one point with the LA Rams, and Trey Regis with the
Raiders. Yeah,
the Raiders. Yes, all of those guys were Billy Napier running backs at the same time. And if I remember correctly, in 2019, they may have all run for 1,000 yards. So Billy Napier always using a stable of running backs. This year, Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne figure to be at the head of that running back trio or tandem, if you will. So let's see if he can get things on the right path, because they want to recruit well and they want to win games at Florida. So two programs with big expectations.
Montrell Johnson's interesting. I watched him this summer already, and he's characterized as a speedster in some places that I've seen, but I didn't see that at all. But he was fun to watch. Like, he has good contact balance. He seems to be one of those backs that, like, it was almost like when I watched Mayan Williams, because your favorite. When I watched him, I was like, he's got a little more juice than what I expected from what he's characterized, and Montrell Johnson's in the opposite direction for me. But they're both fascinating players, and Johnson is someone who, I could see he almost fits what a Florida back has been recruited to be in a lot of ways, where LaMichael Pirine is kind of like the low end for the NFL type, does everything well enough, but you're never going to want to use him as a big part of your rotation. And then you've got Damian Pierce on the opposite end, who you could argue should be getting 80, 90, 80 or 90 targets in a season, and being a guy who could give you maybe like Eckler McCaffrey like volume in the receiving game if they actually used him to his talents. So who's like what's the second point? What's the second one that you're watching?
Number 9. We're going descending order. Number 9. Number 9 is, can Tennessee keep the train rolling? So last year was a renaissance year for Tennessee. I say renaissance year because growing up, it had to be late 90s or early 2000s where T. Martin and Peerless Price were there with Phil Fulmer was the head coach, I think, at the time. Yeah. Won a national championship. Peerless Price, who ended up going to play with Michael Vick, one of the receivers that the Falcons drafted to play with Michael Vick. Anyway, renaissance year last year with Hendon Hooker at the helm. But I think a lot of credit is given to Josh Heupel, the head coach there. Josh Heupel, who runs Art Briles' air raid system, where we line our wide receivers, our outside wide receivers, damn near near the sideline to create and use as much space as possible. They beat Alabama. I think in that game, that game is probably the game that got Jalen Hyatt the Biletnikoff Award, because he was running all over Alabama's secondary as Alabama tried to guard him with safeties. They lose Jalen Hyatt this year. They lose Cedric Tillman, and they lose Hendon Hooker. So it's, to what extent can this system, this Art Briles air raid system under Josh Heupel, to what extent can it continue to produce high level production, and that production parlays itself into draft capital. So Joe Milton, I think a lot of people know, he was a one-time Michigan quarterback, a big player with one of the strongest arms in the country, who's made some boneheaded plays both at Michigan, where he was inaccurate, and then in relief of Hendon Hooker, made especially one boneheaded play at the end of the game where there's no time left on the clock. They're about at the 20 or so, and he runs out of bounds. So can he put it all together? The physical tools and the mental side of the game, can he put that together this year? And then Squirrel White, a second-year player, a freshman, who is in the mold of Jalen Hyatt, a pure speedster who played well in the bowl game against Clemson. I think, was it Clemson or was it or they? I forgot who they played. Anyway, 9 catches over 100 yards and a touchdown. We kind of think that he is going to be taking the helm, but Tennessee, after the year that they had last year, can they keep it rolling? That's number 9 for
Wow. So, and we've got a guy named Squirrel. So we've got
Squirrel
people who we call dogs for how good they are, and they're going to be chasing Squirrel. So that
nickname came from his grandmother, who said she found him chasing a squirrel in the backyard when he was a baby, and that he was keeping up with the squirrel. So that's where he got the nickname.
That's fantastic. That's like folk legend right there kind of stuff. That's awesome. There we go. So what's number 8?
Number 8 is the evolution of Zach Kittley. Zach Kittley is currently the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech. Now, just for some background, Texas Tech is to be considered, one of the modern birthplaces for the air raid, since Mike Leach was there and it kind of took over college football from that point, where Mike Leach's assistants, including one Cliff Kingsbury, eventually went on to coach. Zach Kittley, is considered to be maybe the next Lincoln Riley type coach, where he goes from offensive coordinator to head coach. Bailey Zappi in 2021 threw for nearly 6,000 yards. Nearly 6,000 yards and 62 touchdowns. Used that season to go on and be drafted by the New England Patriots. And then Jarrett Stearns, his leading receiver, had nearly 2,000 yards receiving, all at Western Kentucky. If you can take that type of offense to a Power 5 school like Texas Tech, it might be able to turn that into recruiting. And the reason I say that is there's already what's called a crystal ball that one of the top receivers in next year's class is going to Texas Tech. Presumably, that's to be in Zach Kittley's system. And it's a 5-star player, and we do not see 5-star players going to schools like Texas Tech all the time. And so Zach Kittley is one of those names that we need to be following, because I really think that if he gets that offense to the same level or nearly the same level as the Western Kentucky offense that he had in his 1 year there, that we're going to see Zach Kittley hired at one of these blue blood schools: Clemson, Alabama, USC, Michigan, Ohio State, a school like that. Or he'll stay at Texas Tech and he'll start to bring the elite level recruits in. So the evolution of Zach Kittley here in his second year at Texas Tech is number 8 on my list.
That's awesome. I'm taking notes. So where are we at number 7?
Number 7 is Luther Burden. Now let's get into some players. Luther Burden at Missouri, a wide receiver at Missouri. He was the number one wide receiver recruit in last year's class, going to Missouri, a school that didn't have a stacked wide receiver depth chart. So many thought that he would really produce as a freshman. Now, we watched a little bit and talked a little bit about Luther Burden last year on our show together. And what we saw was a player who was catching the ball at or near the line of scrimmage and who was breaking a lot of tackles, just a kind of a monster to bring down for a defensive back, a college defensive back. And you look at his, physical dimensions, 5'11", you see him anywhere between 208 and 215, and it kind of makes sense. He's built like a running back. 45 receptions, 375 yards last year, 6 touchdowns, only 8.3 yards per reception. So we're looking at someone who's built like DJ Moore, but used like Rondale Moore, just around the line of scrimmage.
That's a better description than I was thinking, because I kept thinking he's built like Josh Reed and he's getting stats like NFL Josh Reed, which which may not be good, but I like the Moore comparisons. That's better.
Yeah. So, I mean, DJ Moore, another player at Maryland who was built like a running back. So, 8.3 yards per reception. Missouri loses its leading receiver from last year, Dominic Lovett, who transfers to Georgia, more of a slot guy. We think that Luther Burden is going to be playing the slot this year. I don't know if that's going to be good or bad for his production and his development, but we had high expectations for this player coming in as a recruit, given his athleticism, given the opportunity there at Missouri. And he didn't really live up to those expectations. So we want to see if he's deployed away from the a little bit more away from the line of scrimmage in 2023. But when I hear that he's playing the slot, that doesn't necessarily lead me to believe that he's going to be deployed downfield. So there's sort of a little bit of a conflict there, but definitely tracking his progress in year 2 is one of the main things that we need to be tracking in 2023.
Nice. Okay. So, lucky number 6. Where are we at there?
Number 6, quarterback rooms at 2 Blue Bloods, Ohio State and Alabama. Now, let's start with Alabama. We've gotten used to, since that halftime in the 2017 National Championship game, when Tua Tagovailoa came in for Jalen Hurts, we've gotten used to Alabama having a certain level of production there coming from the quarterback position and kind of throwing the ball all over the place. Tua Tagovailoa to Mac Jones to Bryce Young. It's not going to look like that this year. I think that they're going to be a team that kind of reverts to what they did early in Nick Saban's career, where the quarterback is really interchangeable and they win with running the ball and defense, the way they did with when Mark Ingram was there at Alabama. Ty Simpson, Tyler Buckner, and Jalen Milroe all have similarities and some differences. Ty Simpson is a 5-star quarterback from the state of Tennessee. There was one point at which I think he was actually committed to Tennessee, ends up going to Alabama. He has a Johnny Manziel or Russell Wilson type flair to his game, is the backyard play style. He can also play within structure, but he definitely loves to do the backyard off script stuff. Tyler Buckner is a transfer from Notre Dame. The last time he played a full season was like in 2018 in high school, in California, where he ran for 1,500 yards in that season. I think as a sophomore, was expected to have a big season at Notre Dame, dealt with injuries there. And so he joins Alabama's backfield, coming along with Tommy Rees, who was the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame last year. He's now the offensive coordinator at Alabama.
Aren't they almost the same age?
I mean, Tommy Rees was the quarterback at the last time Notre Dame made a national championship game, which was just, that was that Manti Te'o team. That Manti Te'o. So he's not that old.
That's what I'm saying. It hasn't been that long, and Buckner's been around a while. Wow.
Yeah, but
okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah, but Buckner, Tommy Rees his quarterback's coach was my former head coach, Chuck Martin. was Tommy Reese's QB coach and offensive coordinator. But then we also get Jalen Milroe, who is probably the best pure rusher / dual threat of the three. And so who's going to win this job out of the quarterback room? And then at Ohio State, you got Kyle McCord, who played with Marvin Harrison Jr. out of the Philadelphia area in high school. He is the upperclassman. But in Devin Brown, I think you have one of the kind of best gunslingers, not afraid to fit it into tight windows, not afraid to deploy the ball downfield, averaged nearly 20 yards per attempt in high school, 20 yards per attempt at high school. He took over for Zach Wilson's Corner Canyon School there in Utah. I mean, it's high school, but 20 yards per attempt on 4,500 yards passing. It's absurd. So I'm really interested to see what happens there at both of these schools. After the decision is made as to who the starting quarterback is, we could see players enter the transfer portal and that have a domino effect in recruiting and a lot of different things. So quarterback rooms.
I was going to ask you the over/under on that. Would it be 2 players that are likely to transfer at that point? And I would, and you pretty much answered that. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I think that there's the chance of these 2 rooms. I think that there's the chance that we see Ty Simpson transfer because he's just in his second year. There are plenty of schools that would be willing to take him, and he could sit out this year and still have. I think technically he could sit out this year and still have 4 years of eligibility left. So, of the 5 players that I've discussed here, I think Ty Simpson is the most. And by the way, I have Ty Simpson rostered, and I think he's a good player. So I would be interested in seeing where he ends up if he does in fact transfer.
Very nice. Okay, so we're halfway through this. So who's number 5?
Number 5 is who is going to emerge in the country at the wide receiver position after Marvin Harrison Jr. The 2023 class it hit the college football ranks hard. Of our established guys, Quentin Johnson, Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Josh Downs, all of those were guys that were established names at the wide receiver position in college football. And behind those guys, collectively, we have a lot of guys who we haven't seen play a lot, don't have a lot of experience. So who emerges behind those guys? I think that there are 2 candidates at Washington, Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan. Rome Odunze, who I've seen in a lot of first-round mock drafts. He more presents a 6'4" outside possession guy. Jalen McMillan is a slot guy, and they get my boy Michael Penix Jr. back. They get a lot of players back.
They got a third receiver that ain't bad either.
Jalen Polk.
Yeah.
Jalen Polk is a good player, and also Jeremy Bernard, who transferred from Michigan State to Washington this year. Kalen DeMoore was with Michael Penix Jr. at Indiana. If you remember the name, what's that guy's name who torched Ohio State? It's not coming to me. Is it going to come to me?
Yeah,
it'll come to me.
Phil Law or no, not Phil Law.
It's a weird name. It's a weird name.
Yeah, he's a slot guy from a couple years ago.
But Whop Fillier. Whop Fillier is who you're thinking. Yeah. Whop Fillier is who you're thinking of. I'm thinking of the outside wide receiver who had like 200 yards against Ohio State. It'll come to me here in a second. But Kalen DeBoer is one of those now head coaches that does more with less. And so really good offensive. It was also Jake Hayner's offensive coordinator. I forgot to say that. Also Jake Hayner's offensive coordinator in 2021, not last year, but 2021. But who emerges behind Marvin Harrison Jr.? You got the Washington guys, and then I really like Barion Brown at Kentucky. Barion Brown is in the mold of Marquise Hollywood Brown, one of these speed guys. He's got more size than Hollywood Brown, but a thin frame, explosive kick returner, probably the best kick returner in the country. And then there's Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s teammate, probably going to play the slot this year, has some versatility. But there are a lot of names that we haven't seen a lot from that could emerge behind Marvin Harrison Jr. Teteroa McMillan who's probably in the Drake London mold at Arizona, another candidate. But there are a lot of guys. But who are we going to see emerge and establish themselves as a name at the wide receiver position?
No, on kind of on a comedic note on probably both of these is I think and I'm kind of serious about this one. The first one is that I'm hearing Ladd McConkey's name a lot as a guy better than people thought, and that sounds like he's like the Charlie Jones of this particular class, possibly, as people saying, "Oh, he's better than we thought." There's more to this guy's game than meets the eye, and then also I like how you slipped in Jay Kaner there. It's kind of like, if I'm sponsored, if I'm contractually obligated to mention Chad Kelly.
Frank Gore. I thought you were going to say Frank Gore. Yeah.
Well, that's on there too. But Chad Kelly, then it looks like Jay Kaner might be that guy for you who's having a really nice camp.
I mean, I've Jay Kaner's been my guy for a while, since he was splitting time there at Fresno State, transfer from Washington.
I think that's going to be a good call, man. I think that's going to be a really good call.
Jay Kaner. Yeah. By the way, if you didn't watch was it 2020? I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, when he upset UCLA in their own house at the end of the game. I mean, one of the best college football games that you'll ever see.
We're gonna find that game, and we're gonna watch that together. We're gonna make time to do that, and we're gonna film it.
He was on one leg at the end of the game, like it was an injury that hurt him the rest of the season, and he's a mobile quarterback. And he drove them down the field anyway. If it was an East Coast game, everybody would be talking about it, because the game ended after 1:00 in the morning East Coast time. People didn't see it. One of the best upsets you'll ever see.
So who's number 4?
Number 4. This is a conversation that we've had, and so I'll be short here. But it's the Quinshon Judkins versus Nicholas Singleton for who reigns supreme in the class of 2025. Both of these, if you have been living under a rock. Nicholas Singleton, the number 1 ranked running back recruit in last year's class at Penn State. And Quinshon Judkins was a 3-star, but a player that we had planted our flag on as a company at Campus to Canton. He was one of the more productive running backs in the country last year. I think that we are going to continue having the debate, kind of like Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, that debate that we had 2 years ago. I think that we're going to continue to debate these players into this season and the 2024 season. So Quinshon Judkins versus Nicholas Singleton, we got to continue to pay attention to that battle.
So am I ruining any of the 3-2-1 if I ask you about Mark Fletcher, the University of Miami running back?
No, you're not. You're not ruining it at all, because Mark Fletcher is most definitely not on this list. And let me tell you something about Mark Fletcher. I am the one who wrote up his profile for the Campus to Canton Freshman and Supplemental Draft Guide. So I have, several thoughts on Mark Fletcher. But I'm interested as to why you asked about Fletcher specifically before I give you my thoughts.
Well, one is that even though I was in Athens for 22 years or longer than that, I first went to school at the University of Miami. And so if I'm a fan of any team for real in college football, it's the Miami Hurricanes, and I'd like to see them kind of get back on track. And I heard Mario Cristobal basically call him a stud, and that he pretty much can do anything we've asked of him, and I haven't seen him at all. I just saw a tweet, and it just caught my eye because he described himself as a big, fast back who can move and pretty much do whatever you need him to do to gain yardage.
Well, that's a surprise to me that he's a big fast back, because he's definitely big. But I think that he's
awesome.
But the rest of that sounds like some coach speak and some false allegations as it pertains to Mark Fletcher.
Now, is he big in the sense that big and fast, if you take out the S in the word fast, is he that kind of big, or is he just big?
No, he doesn't have. I don't think he necessarily has bad weight on him. I was just looking up my evaluation. 6'1", 225 pounds. But so he's one of those guys that I think gets a high pedigree, because these players go to camps, right? They go to camps. The evaluators see them, and there are certain players, when you just look at their frame, you're impressed by their frame. If they're a functional athlete, they'll get high recruiting pedigree. I think Mark Fletcher is that type of player who looks like Tarzan. So half of his recruiting pedigree is just, oh, this guy looks like he's good.
the big guy in the little coat deal. He's like Craig Lumpkin from years ago, the Georgia running back who was the top running back in the country because he was already 6'1", 225. He's smart, and he had a little run with the Packers way back in the day, in the Travis Jervey days, if you remember those. But he never had juice.
I'll read this little excerpt from the and again I did. Oh, the other thing is he went to one of these prestigious high schools. He went to American Heritage in Florida, which is a great program there. So I said, this is what I said. I'll just read this paragraph. Fletcher uses his size at times to play physically, but quite frankly, he lacks the acceleration and burst needed to reach the dangerous ends of the force times mass equation. Put another way, Fletcher accelerates like a train that is turning on its engines after sitting at the station for a few days. He lacks both the quick twitch elusiveness to consistently avoid defenders in open space or the power to run them over. It is not uncommon to see him taken down by a defender in the secondary. He can also get caught from behind. I actually had some I had some footnotes in this evaluation for things that I saw on tape in his games, but I basically concluded that I would not be surprised if he was just used as a fullback or if he switched positions altogether to play defense. Now, the fact that Mario Cristobal says he's playing great, I could be dead wrong here, but
no, but it's cool. It's cool to hear because I was curious today when I saw that. I was like, I have to ask Felix about him because I hadn't heard of him, and that's not my realm. But I figured that you guys had definitely were very familiar with him. And obviously I asked the right person.
I just got lucky because I just so happened to write his evaluation. So, I got some strong opinions on him.
All right, so now we are.
It's funny that you say that. Talk about the freshman because number 3 on my list is about the freshman, and this is a fabulous quarterback. This is a fabulous freshman class at the quarterback position. Arch Manning is the name that everyone knows. I think he's he is the number 1 quarterback according to the recruiting services. But for my money, he's quarterback 3 in this class. That's still very good, but you got Arch Manning, Malachi Nelson at USC, Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. Jackson Arnold, it's funny, he reminds me a little bit of Matt Corral, and his offensive coordinator is Jeff Levy, who was Matt Corral's offensive coordinator at USC. But for my money, the cream of the crop, in my opinion, is Dante Moore, who's at UCLA with Chip Kelly. He went to Detroit King in Michigan. Detroit King, if you list the top 3 schools in high school football in Michigan, Detroit King would be up there along with Muskegon. Started as a freshman. So, and I heard the story from Alan True of 24/7 Sports. They had Dante Moore, come up in the offseason as an 8th grader in practicing with the team that offseason between his 8th grade year and 9th grade year. And the coaches knew that this 8th grader, this rising 9th grader, had something. And so he started for Detroit King to me, a 9th grader starting as a freshman is more impressive than a freshman starting in college because, the physical development.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not there yet. It's just not there yet. So, he played in 2 state championship games that are played on Ford Field where the Lions play. But from the types of throws that we see, anticipatory throws, back shoulder throws, he gets rid of the ball quickly. I think he's going to be one of these quarterbacks that's difficult to sack because he gets rid of it quickly. They're just things that you don't see from high school players. You see all the deep throws, all the go routes. You can see those on every single high school player's tape. But throwing to the back shoulder, throwing in the middle of the field with defenders around and anticipating a window, you just don't. You don't see stuff like that. So Dante Moore is my number one quarterback.
Love it. So top 2. What's our second?
Top
big one.
Top two. I'm very intrigued by who will be the quarterback 3 for the 2024 class. There are 2 names at the top that everyone is pointing to in Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. Those are the guys that we're kind of writing off. All right, they're going to be first-round draft picks. Who is going to be third? I think that there are a couple of candidates that I have heard. Quinn Ewers at Texas, Michael Penix Jr., who we've already mentioned, at Washington, J.J. McCarthy at Michigan, and a dark horse out there, I think, is Michael Pratt at Tulane. Now, I think it's uncommon for a G5, definitely quarterback, to go in the first round, but we just saw it. I mean, Trey Lance was an FCS quarterback who went in the first round. We saw it with Joe Flacco coming out of Delaware. Michael Pratt, I think he has a strong arm. He's mobile. He's really gutsy. I mean, was it last year when they started? No, he's at Tulane, but he should have. He almost came back against Oklahoma in 2021 in their own place. Gave Lincoln Riley and Spencer Rattler there a scare. And then in 2022, actually beat Lincoln Riley and USC in the bowl game, in an epic bowl game. I think I don't know. I'm just talking about Michael Pratt here, but I think that the NFL is going to like how gritty he is, how tough he is. And when I mean tough, I mean he's one of these quarterbacks that you see running towards the goal line and he doesn't slide. He's putting his shoulder down and getting helicopter spun around and getting into the end zone. He probably takes too many hits, actually. But strong arm, kind of a fearless player who, again, another player who started as a true freshman and has really improved. He could stay another year, but he's a candidate. But generally speaking, who is going to emerge behind Caleb Williams and Michael Penix Jr.? I think it might be one of these guys. It might be somebody else, but I'm intrigued to see.
Yeah, it's a great list. It's a great list of players. And it's fascinating that you bring up Trey Lance, because I got a question from a listener today asking me, Dan Orlovsky mentioned, I guess, on ESPN that Trey Lance wasn't a fit for the San Francisco offense, and wanted to know what my thoughts were on that.
Isn't that what he ran in college? He ran that wide zone, play action off of wide zone scheme.
Yeah, West Coast offense at North Dakota State, and they ran a true West Coast offense. So, obviously that's why I was probably asked, because they probably read it in the RSP and said, that doesn't match up, So, to try and give credit to Dan as to what he was saying without seeing what Dan said, I thought, well, maybe what he was saying was more several steps of not showing his work to explain why he said that. Because to me, one is that, yes, how you read defenses in the NFL within the scope of a West Coast offense is probably a lot more advanced than what he was doing at North Dakota State to some degree, based on the defenses that he might have been facing, or at least maybe not structurally the defenses, but how advanced the defenders were at being able to disguise and do different things at that level that maybe you would see than what you'd see in the NFL. But more importantly, I didn't take it as that he wasn't a literal mismatch for the scheme, as much as that he was never Kyle Shanahan's guy, no matter what the media said. Because I think, and hear me out, I want to see if you think I'm wearing a tinfoil hat on this one. But because, my thought is that when you look at the Shanahan family, I've talked a lot about how Mike Shanahan had a history of being a dysfunctional communicator with the Denver Broncos. As good of a coach as he was, it was very well known. Ted Sundquist, when I came on his show, and Brandon Thorne, the excellent offensive line writer nowadays who does scouting for the Duke Merriweather's, offensive lineman convention basically every year that these guys get together in the pros and compare notes on how to try and stop pass rushers. Brandon Thornton does these scouting reports, and Brandon was a production assistant for Ted Sundquist when Sundquist had me on his show. And during that time, he told the story about how Jake Plummer, Pro Bowl year with Denver, got the AFC Championship through multiple interceptions in that game, and Mike Shanahan said it was over. Like, he knew he didn't want him to be the starter, but Plummer had the team. And then what you mysteriously saw, and C. Salami told me this watching and charting plays, is that one of Plummer's favorite plays was basically a play action rollout that they went deep all the time that year that he had success, and Shanahan took it out of the playbook. Well, the next year, just completely removed Jake Plummer's best play from the playbook, and they struggled, and they inserted Jay Cutler, and then Plummer promptly retired, probably in disgust of what was going on. And then when I think of Robert Griffin Jr. and him apparently going to Shanahan and saying, I want to be developed like a real quarterback. Like, I want to be developed as a pocket passer. I want to learn everything I need to learn. And I'd like input on some of the plays in our offense. This was after his first year where he was awesome in the scheme that they used. Apparently, Shanahan had issue with that because he later was on radio in Washington playing this whole, like
RG3 was a prima donna for asking.
Yeah, but also expertly couching it in a way of saying it wasn't really Robert. He's just a young kid. He didn't know better. It was really Dan Snyder putting him up to this. And because no rookie or first-year quarterback asked for input into the offense. I mean, he didn't know, but nobody does. That's unheard of. So that year I asked some scouts I know if that was true, and they all laughed, and they were all like, no, 90% of the league allows their first year or even rookie quarterbacks to have input into the offense once they've learned some things to be able to get some plays in there. And what he was asking for was not unheard of at all. And because I remember watching Griffin that second year, and they ran so much max protect, and like it was like ridiculous how much max protect they run, and they still couldn't protect him, and they were only like sometimes 2-3 receivers going out for routes, and they were getting well covered, and he was getting sacked, and a lot of that may have been on Griffin, but a lot of it was also on what they did with that scheme. It was almost sabotage, and so I look at that and go, I think of those things, especially with Sundquist saying to me that when they drafted Cutler, he said I had to make sure that I got agreement from Shanahan on who I could draft if the guy he wanted, who was Matt Leinart, got picked, that we could agree on Jay Cutler, because and when you think back, I would bet money that he wanted Kirk Cousins, and that was his demand to have that picked when Robert Griffin was drafted, and that the team that Snyder or the upper brass above Shanahan wanted Griffin. And the reason I'm sharing all this is that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When you look at Kyle Shanahan, just like his dad, great play caller, but just like all West Coast offensive guys, they all they not all, but they can err on the side of scheme over personnel. And if there's players who are transcendent of scheme in terms of what they can do on the field, but they don't follow the scheme well right away, those guys, the West Coast offensive guys, don't like that. They can err against that sometimes. Not all of them, but some of them can. Especially if they err on that side of the point that, as I've been told by quarterback coaches, that they view players almost like video games, components of a video game, and that they're at the control. It's their offense. And so when I think of John Lynch, a former player, a Hall of Fame caliber safety, as a GM, picking players, and then a coach who's a system guy, born and raised in a system, and he's known for his system, to the point that he's always picking these running backs who have great speed, can catch the ball, but you have to basically tell them where to run it and don't deviate, because that's what they're better in that than anything else, because they're not high-end processors. Tevin Coleman's, Jerick McKinnon's, to some extent, Elijah Mitchell, guys like that. They had to, in Atlanta, he basically got put in a corner to use Devonta Freeman the way that they did in their best year. And I think that Christian McCaffrey was put in there by John Lynch. I think John Lynch was like, I'm tired of these. We've got this great offensive line, and you're just telling these guys to hit this one hole. Don't cut back. Don't think about bouncing. Don't think about doing anything that's instinctive. Just hit this one crease. Do what I say. I think he kind of put Shanahan in the hole and said, that's not working great enough because they all keep getting hurt, and then we don't have anybody who's worth a damn, and you're going to put Deebo Samuel in there to run the ball, so I'm going to put McCaffrey in there. And this long approach to this thing is because when I think of Trey Lance, I really think now that Shanahan wanted Mac Jones. I really think he wanted an executor. And I think that Lynch saw a West Coast offensive young guy who could transcend things if they wanted to, but Shanahan saw it as, I want to win now. We've got a great team all around us. Why are you going to give me a rookie who needs more seasoning in that regard, whereas I could have Jones a little bit later. We can sit back and have Garoppolo, and then he can just ease him on in there, and it won't take as long. And I think there's a war going on, like a Cold War between the GM and the coach. And I think Trey Lance is one of those players who got caught in the middle of it, and hopefully he gets out of town, because I think that's really that he will never fit in this offense, because he can transcend it, and he may be more apt to do that off structure or run or do some things that isn't the perfect academic read that Shanahan wants. And as a result of that, Shanahan's already said, forget you. I don't want you. I'm just going to run you out of here. And I don't mean it in a ruthless, like, mean sort of way, like he hates Trey Lance. I just think he hates the idea of Trey Lance and wants to eliminate him from any consideration for his team as a viable option.
Basically make him expendable the same way Mike Shanahan made Robert Griffin III expendable.
Yeah. So that's my tinfoil hat theory on all of this. Like, if I could bet $5 here and there and say, in 10 years we're going to hear John Lynch, we're going to hear reports about John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and how they did not work well together behind the scenes compared to what we're seeing. So
it'll be the 30 for 30. It'll be the 30 for 30 on Trey Lance.
So with that said, what's your number one topic heading into the season here?
I mean, there's one storyline that sticks out amongst all the storylines in college football, and that is just watching what happens with Colorado. What happens with Coach Prime's Colorado? Colorado is 130th in returning production, according to our data there at Campus to Canton, the C2C Winning Edge package. 130th. There are only 133 FBS teams. So I'm just really curious. I mean, they had 50 transfers in this year's class. 50 transfers. 50. We're talking about by the time March or March came around, they didn't even have enough players, I don't think, to put 22 players on the field. So they have a full roster now, 50 transfers. It's a super unique approach. How does this team mesh? How does this team gel? You got an innovative offensive mind in Sean Lewis. Sean Lewis was the former the former head coach at Kent State in the MAC. Kent State runs a up-tempo offense, scores a lot of points. So now we're going to see that system in the Pac-12, or at least however long Colorado is in the Pac-12 before they join the Big 12, and the Pac-12 kind of collapses on itself. But Colorado is the biggest story this year. However it goes, good or bad, it's going to be the biggest story in college football, which is why me and my son Cameron, we're going to be going to that first game against Nebraska on September 9th, the first home game there at Colorado. So, I mean, that's the biggest story in college football is Coach Prime. What does that team look like? And I can't wait to see the spectacle.
Yeah, and spectacle, I think, is a great word for it. But I think it's a strategic one on Deion's part to take a lot of pressure off the kids in the same way that, say Sean Payton brought up the New York Jets and brought up Nathaniel Hackett, and his job and his coaching job in Denver the year before. I think it's to get people distracted from the players that they want to ask a lot of questions about, and allow the coaches to just take the heat, to be in that spotlight and do what they need to do. So yeah, Russell Wilson doesn't have to hear about how bad his season was the year before, or how are you, Shadir Sanders, going to handle jumping leagues, or Jaquez Hunter jumping leagues? Are you big enough to do these things, or just get the players away from the players so that they can just focus on doing what he's telling them to do? I don't know. Deion is definitely very good at drawing attention, and can attract that in terms of what he says and what he does. But he's a smart guy. You certainly see that with him, and he uses that to his advantage. It does. I agree. It's going to be a fascinating thing, and he also knows. I mean, I don't know if I'd go so far to say that he believes that any attention is good attention. I don't think he believes that, but I think he's far more comfortable with forms of attention that other coaches just wouldn't be able to handle as well or as adeptly. So it may look like that in comparison. Like, to me, I don't know. Dabo Sweeney to me seems like the opposite of that. Like a guy who, he puts his foot in his mouth a lot, and then he feels uncomfortable about it afterwards. Whereas I think that people think Deion's putting his foot in his mouth when he's actually, doing something else instead, or that he never looks like he's really truly putting his foot in his mouth, even though people want to make it look that way on some regard.
I mean, I have to agree with you on Coach Prime being smart here, because I look at his coordinator hires. Charles Kelly was at Alabama before. I think he was the assistant. Was he the assistant defensive coordinator? And then Sean Lewis was widely considered one of the best coaches in the MAC, and he took him from being a head coach to being their offensive coordinator. I mean, I'm interested to see. I don't know that it'll be this year. I think that they'll have to get a few recruiting classes under their belts, 3 years down the line, and we'll see it. But I mean,
I can't think of a better
chapter one's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I can't think of a better place for him to be able to grow a program than a place like Colorado. I mean, really, that would be a fantastic place. Boulder's a great town for a lot of reasons. Colorado is a football-friendly city, or football-friendly state as a whole. It's not that far from Denver, so a lot of Denver people would be very happy to kind of hitch to that bandwagon. And really, playing at altitude can be a challenge for other teams. So getting great athletes who get used to playing in that environment is also, gives them a little bit of an advantage. That's kind of fun. And listen, if you've successfully had stiff battles with the greatest wide receiver of all time in your playing career, you didn't do it just because you were fast. There were a lot of fast guys who basically looked like they came out of the toaster after Jerry Rice got through with them. And Deion Sanders was rarely one of them. You've got to be a student of the game to win against the ultimate student of the game in Jerry Rice, or one of the ultimate students of the game. So, yeah, we've seen it every step of the way here. I just think, he's one of those guys that's going to continually get questioned. It's like Lamar Jackson. I mean, Lamar Jackson gets questioned in every turn, every step of the way. And here he was, Joel Corey, talking about he acquitted himself well negotiating his contract. There are people I have a lot of respect for who do, who are in the financial industry, who are like, yeah, there's no way this is going to work out well. And I feel like that he's done himself a disservice, and somebody needs to. I want things to go well for him, but somebody needs to warn him. And da 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 da. And here we are, and and some of them are like, to their credit, that some of those people were like, I was wrong, and I'm so impressed with what he did. And we've never seen that. We've never seen that. And here's Lamar Jackson, and proving people wrong. And I think that Deion Sanders is going to be kind of in the same boat, because people don't see him coming. They think they see who he is, but they don't know who he is. And I think that's gonna, once they figure it out, it's gonna be too late.
Chapter 1's gonna be fun. By the way, 11 days away from college football, week 0, so we're gonna get to see, some of this stuff before the NFL kicks off.
Absolutely, and we'll be, this was a great kickoff show. We're going to be doing this every other week like we did last year. Of course, you can check out campus2canton.com to get started and learn how to play both sides of the equation here when it comes to NFL and college football. Great format. Of course, the rookie scouting portfolio, if you haven't gotten your RSP yet. Look, I tell my readers all the time, I give you the post-draft because that's what you want, but what you find out you need is that pre-draft, because that pre-draft is telling you the straight dope without all the landing spot concerns and things like that. It's the true scouting reports. And I think and a lot of my longtime readers are the ones that go, you told me that and I didn't believe you, but I like the pre-draft as much, if not more, because you get that on players long term. It's going to help you in your waiver wires. I know you're all excited about your drafts, and it'll help you with your drafts too. But you also get the long term look at these guys. You can look back and see some of these players who migrate to another team, who've been on 3 or 4 teams, and people are like, oh, he's no good, and figure out, oh, you know what? Maybe you just need the right situation, things like that, and things can blossom from there. So you can go to mountwaldman.com to learn more about that, and we will catch you again in a couple of weeks. On behalf of Felix Sharpe and myself, thanks again for listening, and have a good night.